The great hall of the Galactic Assembly stretched for miles in every direction, its crystal walls reflecting the light of 1,000 stars. Representatives from 400 different species filled the massive space, their voices creating a low hum that never quite stopped. At the center of it all sat the Council of Voices, where the most important decisions in the galaxy were made. Hyunwoo adjusted his simple black uniform as he walked toward the human delegation's seats. The other species watched him with eyes that held too much fear and not enough trust. He had been humanity's voice in this place for 15 years, and in all that time, he had never felt the weight of their stares quite like this. Bora, his chief advisor, fell into step beside him. Her face showed nothing, but he could see the tension in her shoulders. "The vote count looks bad," she whispered as they took their places. "The Zentari have been working hard to turn everyone against us." Hyunwoo nodded, but said nothing. He had expected this day would come eventually. Humanity had joined the Assembly 200 years ago as eager newcomers, grateful to be part of something bigger than themselves. They had brought their technology, their ideas, and their willingness to help solve the galaxy's problems. But gratitude had slowly turned to suspicion, and suspicion had grown into fear. The problem was simple. Humans learned too fast and grew too quickly. In 2 centuries, they had gone from having one small colony to controlling 47 star systems. Their technology advanced at a pace that made other species uncomfortable. Their military grew stronger every year, not because they wanted to fight, but because the galaxy was a dangerous place, and they had learned to be ready for anything. Speaker Kale Oath of the Zentari Empire stood up at the center podium. His tall, thin form cast a long shadow across the floor as he began to speak. Today, we vote on Resolution 7749, which will place necessary limits on human expansion and military development for the safety of all galactic civilization. The words stung, because Hyunwoo knew they came from fear, not wisdom. He had spent years trying to build trust between humanity and the other species. He had negotiated trade deals that helped everyone, supported peace missions to troubled regions, and shared human technology freely with anyone who asked. None of it seemed to matter now. The human species has shown a pattern of aggressive expansion that threatens the balance of power in our galaxy, Kaeloth continued. They have built weapons of incredible power and established military bases. In strategic locations, they have developed artificial intelligence that surpasses anything we have seen before. We cannot allow this growth to continue unchecked. Bora leaned over to whisper in Hyunwoo's ear. They are afraid of our AI research, but they use our medical technology to save their people every day. They fear our weapons, but they called for our help when the Void Swarm attacked the outer colonies last year. Hyunwoo knew she was right, but it did not change anything. Fear was stronger than gratitude, and the galaxy had chosen fear. One by one, representatives from different species stood up to speak in favor of the resolution. The hegemony talked about the need for stability. The Trade Federation worried about human competition. The Peaceful Worlds Coalition claimed they only wanted to preserve the balance that had kept the galaxy safe for 3,000 years. When it came time for humanity to speak, Hyunwoo stood slowly and walked to the central podium. The hall fell silent as 400 species waited to hear what humanity would say about their fate being decided by others. "We came to this assembly 200 years ago as newcomers to your ancient civilization," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the vast space. "We brought our technology, our knowledge, and our desire to be part of something greater than ourselves. We have fought beside you against common enemies, shared our discoveries freely, and tried to be good neighbors to all." He paused and looked around the hall, meeting the eyes of representatives he had worked with for years, species he had considered friends. "But it seems that being good neighbors is not enough. Our crime is not that we have attacked anyone or broken any laws. Our crime is that we have grown strong, and strength in the hands of humans apparently terrifies you." The silence in the hall was complete now. Even the usual background noise of translation devices and shuffling feet had stopped. "You speak of balance and stability, but what you really mean is that you want humanity to stay weak enough that you do not have to worry about us. You want us to limit our growth so that you can sleep peacefully at night, knowing that we will never be strong enough to threaten your comfortable position at the top of galactic society." Kale Oth stood up from his seat. "The human representative speaks of threats. This only proves our point about their aggressive nature. Hyunwoo turned to look at him directly. I speak of the threat you perceive, not the threat we pose. There is a difference, and your inability to see it is exactly why this resolution will pass today. The voting process took 3 hours. Representatives cast their votes electronically, and the results appeared on the massive displays around the hall for everyone to see. When it was finished, the numbers were exactly what Hyunwoo had expected. 387 species in favor, 12 abstaining, and only humanity opposed. Speaker Kale Oth read the results aloud, his voice carrying a note of satisfaction. Resolution 7749 has passed by an overwhelming majority. Humanity will be limited to their current 47 systems and must submit all military development plans to Assembly oversight. Additionally, all artificial intelligence research must be shared with the Assembly Council, and the human quantum Jumpgate network must be reduced to civilian-only usage. Bo-Ra touched Hyunwoo's arm gently. What do we do now? Before he could answer, Kaloth spoke again. We also require humanity to surrender their most advanced AI research data and dismantle any quantum jump gates that could be used for military purposes. These measures will take effect immediately. That was the moment everything changed. Hyunwoo felt something cold settle in his chest as he realized that the galaxy was not just trying to limit humanity's growth. They were trying to strip away the very things that made humans special. They wanted to take humanity's greatest achievements and either destroy them or put them under alien control. He stood up slowly and walked back to the podium one final time. The hall was buzzing with conversation as representatives discussed the details of implementing the resolution, but they fell silent again when they saw him approaching the microphone. We came here believing in cooperation, he said, his voice perfectly calm and controlled. We leave knowing that fear governs your hearts more than wisdom. He turned and began walking toward the exit, with Bo-Ra and the rest of the human delegation following behind him. As they reached the massive doors of the assembly hall, he stopped and looked back one more time at the 400 species that had just declared themselves humanity's enemies. You have made your choice, he said, his words echoing through the silent hall. Now you will live with the consequences. The doors closed behind them with a sound like thunder, and humanity's membership in the Galactic Assembly came to an end. In the hall behind them, alien representatives whispered nervously among themselves. They had expected protests, angry speeches, or threats of retaliation. They had not expected the quiet dignity with which humanity had accepted their isolation, and somehow that made them more nervous than any threat could have. As Hyunwoo and his delegation boarded their ship to return to Earth, none of them spoke about what would happen next. They all knew that humanity would not simply accept the limitations the galaxy had tried to impose. The only question was what form their response would take, and whether the galaxy would survive to regret the choice they had made today. 6 months had passed since humanity walked out of the Galactic Assembly, and the silence from human space was beginning to worry everyone. The galaxy had expected angry messages, desperate attempts at negotiation, or even threats of war. Instead, they got nothing at all. It was as if humanity had simply vanished from the galaxy overnight. Captain Jae-min stood on the bridge of the Terran defense ship Harmony, watching as the last civilian transport ship departed from Kepler Station. The massive space station had been a hub of interspecies trade for over 50 years, but now it was being shut down permanently. Earth Command had sent clear orders to all human colonies and outposts. Cut all ties with alien species immediately. Sir, we are receiving another transmission from the Vorthak Trade Fleet, his communications officer reported. They are asking about their scheduled cargo pickup next week. Same response as always, Jaemin replied, without looking away from the view screen. No response at all. The officer nodded and closed the channel without acknowledging the alien message. It was the 15th such transmission they had received this week, and Jaemin knew that similar scenes were playing out across all of human space. Their former trading partners, allies, and colleagues were sending increasingly desperate messages into the void, and humanity was not answering any of them. Dr. Yoonji walked through the empty corridors of the Galactic Research Institute, on Proxima Station, supervising the removal of the last human equipment. She had spent 12 years working here alongside scientists from dozens of different species, developing new medical treatments and studying the mysteries of the galaxy together. Now she was packing up everything humanity had contributed and taking it home. "Dr. Yunji, please wait," called a voice behind her. She turned to see Dr. Velkoth, a Zentari scientist she had worked with for years. His usually calm demeanor showed signs of stress as he approached her. "The antimatter research project is only 3 months away from completion," he said urgently. "If you take the human computational models with you, the entire project will fail. Billions of people across the galaxy could benefit from this technology." Yunji stopped packing and looked at her former colleague with something like sadness in her eyes. "The same galaxy that voted to limit our research and demanded we surrender our AI technology. The same galaxy that decided we were too dangerous to be trusted as equal partners." "That was politics," Velkoth protested. "This is science. This is about helping people. Politics and science are not separate when the politicians decide that our science is too dangerous to exist," Yunji replied. She sealed the last container of human research data and signaled for her team to begin loading it onto their transport ship. "Your assembly made its choice. Now you get to live with the consequences." As her ship departed from Proxima Station, Velkoth stood at the observation window watching it disappear into the darkness of space. Around him, the research facility that had once been the pride of galactic cooperation was already beginning to shut down. Without human contributions, most of their projects would have to be abandoned. The economic effects of humanity's withdrawal were becoming impossible to ignore. The Vorthak Empire had built much of their economy around trading human-manufactured goods to other species. Human technology was more advanced, more reliable, and cheaper to produce than anything the Vorthak could make themselves. Now their trade revenues were falling by 20% every month, and their government was facing serious financial problems. Minister Dalroth sat in his office on the Vorthak homeworld, staring at economic reports that grew worse every day. His advisors had been telling him for weeks that they needed to find alternative suppliers for the goods they had been buying from humanity. But the alternatives were either too expensive or too primitive to meet their needs. "What about the hegemony, industrial worlds?" he asked his chief economic advisor. "Can they replace human production capacity? They could provide maybe 30% of what we need, but their prices are 4 times higher than what humans charged us," the advisor replied. "And their quality control is not nearly as good." Dalroth rubbed his temples, feeling the beginning of a headache. "What about the Trade Federation? They are having the same problems we are. Half their member species were dependent on human goods and services. Their internal trade networks are starting to collapse without human logistics support." The minister stood up and walked to his window, looking out at the capital city below. Even here, the effects of humanity's absence were visible. Construction projects were slowing down because they could not get the advanced materials that human factories had provided. Transportation systems were becoming less reliable because human maintenance contracts had been terminated. The medical centers were running low on supplies because much of their equipment had been manufactured in human space. "Send another message to Earth," he ordered. "Offer them whatever they want. Trade concessions, political support in the assembly, anything." His advisor shook his head sadly. "Sir, we have sent 47 messages to various human colonies and government offices. None of them have been answered. It is as if they have decided we no longer exist." Meanwhile, in the Terran High Command on Earth, Fleet Admiral Su Jin was reviewing reports from across human space. The withdrawal was proceeding exactly as planned. Every human colony had cut all communications with alien species. All trade agreements had been terminated. All joint research projects had been abandoned. Humanity was pulling back into itself, and the galaxy was starting to feel the effects. "How are our defense preparations coming along?" she asked her intelligence. "Chief Minho, better than expected. Without the need to coordinate with alien militaries, we can focus entirely on our own strategic needs. Our new ship designs are already 2 generations ahead of anything in the galactic fleet." Sujin nodded as she studied the tactical displays and the void swarm situation. Minho's expression grew more serious. "Our deep space monitoring stations are detecting increased activity in the dark regions beyond the galactic rim. The swarm appears to be massing for another major offensive, but without our early warning data, the galactic defense forces will not see them coming until it is too late." Are we sharing this intelligence with the Assembly? No, ma'am. Our orders are clear. No communication with alien species means no communication. If they want our help, they know where to find us. Sujin turned back to the strategic display, which showed the locations of human colonies scattered across their 47 star systems. Each system was now operating as a completely independent unit, with no outside contact except with other human worlds. It was the most comprehensive isolation any species had ever imposed on itself, and it was working exactly as intended. The psychological effects on the galaxy were becoming as important as the economic ones. For 3,000 years, the Galactic Assembly had been the center of civilization, the place where all important decisions were made. Species might disagree with each other, but they always talked through their problems in the Great Hall on HFY. Now, for the first time in recorded history, an entire species had simply walked away and refused to participate in the galactic community. Ambassador Kaeloth sat in his private office, reading reports from across the galaxy about the effects of humanity's withdrawal. What had seemed like a necessary action 6 months ago was starting to look like a terrible mistake. The resolution to limit human expansion had been passed to preserve galactic stability, but humanity's response was creating more instability than their growth ever had. "Sir, we have received another request from the Outer Rim Coalition," his aide informed him. "They are asking if the Assembly has any plans to address the security situation in their sector." Kaeloth looked up from his reports with tired eyes. The Outer Rim had been defended by joint patrols that included human ships and crews. When humanity withdrew, they had taken 30% of the Coalition's defensive capability with them. Now pirate attacks were increasing, and several colony worlds were requesting emergency assistance. What can we tell them? Honestly, sir, not much. The species that remain in the Assembly do not have enough ships to patrol the Outer Rim effectively. The humans were providing most of the fast response capability in that region. Kaeloth stood up and walked to his window, which looked out over the great plaza where representatives from hundreds of species gathered every day to conduct galactic business. The plaza was busier than ever, but somehow it felt empty without the human delegation that had occupied the same section for 200 years. "Send a message to Earth," he said finally. "Tell them we are prepared to discuss modifications to Resolution 7749. His aide looked surprised. "Sir, are you sure?" "The Council voted overwhelmingly to pass that resolution." "The Council voted based on fear and incomplete information," Kaeloth replied. "Now we are seeing the real cost of our decision, and it may be higher than we can afford to pay." But when the message was sent to Earth, like all the others before it, there was no reply. Humanity had made its choice, and now the galaxy was learning what it meant to live in a universe where the most dynamic and innovative species had decided to stop sharing their gifts with everyone else. 2 years had passed since humanity walked away from the Galactic Assembly, and now the galaxy was burning. The Void Swarm had returned with a vengeance, pouring out of the dark space between galaxies like a plague of living nightmares. The creatures were unlike anything else in the known universe, part organic, part machine, and completely hostile to all other forms of life. Fleet Admiral Su Jin stood on the command deck of the Terran dreadnought Indomitable, watching the tactical displays that showed the current state of the galactic war. The screens painted a picture of total disaster for the non-human species. System after system was falling to the swarm, and the galaxy's defensive lines were collapsing. Everywhere. "Show me the Centauri sector," she ordered her tactical officer. The display shifted to show what had once been a thriving region of space containing 12 inhabited worlds. Now it was a graveyard. The Void Swarm had consumed everything: planets, space stations, entire fleets. Where there had once been cities and farmlands, there was now only the twisted biomechanical structures that the swarm built from the remains of their victims. The Zentari Third Fleet attempted to make a stand at Proxima Colony 3 days ago, the tactical officer reported. They lasted approximately 40 minutes before being completely destroyed. Su Jin nodded grimly. The same pattern was repeating itself across the galaxy. Alien fleets would engage the swarm using traditional tactics and technology, fight bravely for a short time, and then be overwhelmed and consumed. The defensive strategies that had worked against the swarm's previous attacks were no longer effective, and the galaxy's military leaders could not understand why. "Ma'am, we are receiving another transmission from the Emergency Assembly Council," her communications officer announced. "They are requesting immediate military assistance." "Same response as always," Sujin replied, without looking away from the tactical display. No response. She had been receiving such requests for months now. Every major species in the galaxy had sent messages begging for human help. Some offered trade concessions, others promised political reforms, and a few had even suggested that Resolution 7749 could be completely repealed. But Earth's response to all of them was the same silence that had greeted every alien communication for the past 2 years. The truth was that humanity knew exactly what was happening and why. Deep in the classified sections of Terran intelligence, Director Minho had been tracking the Void Swarm's movements since before they had even attacked. Human monitoring stations scattered throughout the dark regions of space had been watching the creatures mass their forces and prepare for their next offensive. Minho sat in his secure office beneath the streets of Geneva, studying reports that would have terrified any alien military commander. The Void Swarm had not just grown larger since their last attack, they had evolved. The creatures were now using adaptive tactics that allowed them to learn from each battle and counter any strategy used against them. "The problem is that they are fighting the same war they fought 5 years ago," he explained to his staff during their daily briefing. "They are using the same defensive formations, the same weapon systems, and the same tactical approaches. The Swarm has had years to analyze all of that data and develop countermeasures." His chief analyst, Dr. Yu Jin, pulled up a holographic display showing the Swarm's attack patterns. "Our intelligence suggests that they specifically target the command and control systems that were developed through the old Galactic Defense Initiative, the same systems that humans helped design and maintain." Minho leaned back in his chair, considering the implications. "So the galaxy's defenses are not just failing, they are actively working against them." "That is correct, sir. Every time an alien fleet tries to coordinate their defense using the old protocols, the Swarm can predict their movements and counter them before they can be effective." Meanwhile, on the human colony world of New Sol, Director of Colonial Defense Yuna was reviewing casualty reports from across the galaxy. The numbers were staggering. Billions of aliens dead, hundreds of worlds consumed, entire civilizations erased from existence. Any normal person would have felt sympathy for such massive suffering, but Yuna found it difficult to feel anything but cold satisfaction. "The hegemony has lost their entire outer territory," her aide reported. "Their government is requesting permission to evacuate their core worlds through human space." Yuna looked up from her reports with interest. "The same hegemony that supported Resolution 7749. "Yes, ma'am. They voted in favor of limiting human military development, citing concerns about our aggressive expansion. And now they want us to risk our own security to help them evacuate." Yuna stood up and walked to her window, which looked out over New Sol's bustling commercial district. Life on human worlds continued normally while the galaxy burned around them. "What is the current status of their military forces?" "They have approximately 15% of their original fleet strength remaining. Most of their shipyards have been destroyed, and their industrial capacity is nearly gone." Yuna nodded thoughtfully. The hegemony had once been one of the most powerful military forces in the galaxy, second only to humanity itself. Now they were begging for help from the very species they had tried to contain and control. "Send them our standard response," she ordered. No response at all. The Emergency Assembly Council was meeting in continuous session now, desperately trying to coordinate a galaxy-wide response to the Swarm invasion. The Great Hall that had once housed 400 species now held representatives from less than 200. The rest had either been consumed by the Swarm or were too busy fighting for their survival to attend political meetings. Ambassador Kale Oth looked around the hall at his fellow survivors and felt a deep sense of despair. The Confident Alliance, that had voted to limit humanity 2 years ago, was now a collection of desperate refugees, begging for help from anyone who might be able to provide it. "The Vorthak Empire has fallen," announced Speaker Dal Neth of the Trade Federation. "Their homeworld was consumed yesterday, along with what remained of their government." A murmur of shock and fear ran through the assembled representatives. The Vorthak had been one of the strongest supporters of Resolution 7749, arguing that humanity's military growth posed a threat to galactic stability. Now they were extinct, and their former territory was being converted into swarm breeding grounds. "What about the human colonies in that region?" asked Representative Vorak of the Peaceful Worlds Coalition. "Have they been attacked?" "Negative," Dalneth replied. "The swarm appears to be avoiding human space entirely. Our intelligence suggests that they are specifically targeting non-human worlds." The silence that followed this announcement was heavy, with implication. Everyone in the hall understood what it meant, even if nobody wanted to say it out loud. The Void Swarm was not avoiding human space by accident. They were being directed to avoid it. Kaeloth stood up slowly and walked to the central podium. His usual confidence was gone, replaced by the weary acceptance of someone who had finally understood the true cost of his decisions. "I think we all know what needs to be said," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the quiet hall. "The humans are not coming to save us. They have the technology and the military strength to stop the swarm, but they are choosing not to use it. That is impossible," protested Vorak. "Humans are not cruel by nature. They have always been willing to help others." "They were willing to help when they were part of our community," Kaeloth replied. "But we made it clear that they were not. Welcome as equals. We treated them as a threat to be contained rather than allies to be cherished. Now they are treating us the same way we treated them." Dr. Velkoth, one of the few Zentari scientists to survive the destruction of their research facilities, stood up to address the assembly. "Our analysis suggests that the humans have been tracking the swarm's movements for years. They know exactly where the attacks will come and which worlds will fall next." "Then why are they not warning us?" demanded Dalneth. "Because we told them that their military development was too dangerous to continue," Velkoth replied bitterly. "We demanded that they share their AI research with us, then expressed fear when their artificial intelligence proved superior to ours. We wanted them weak enough that we would not have to worry about them, and now they are letting us discover what it means to live in a galaxy where we are the weak ones." As the debate continued, none of the assembled representatives wanted to acknowledge the growing evidence that humanity was not just allowing the galaxy to burn. They were actively helping the fire spread. The swarm's attacks were too precise, too well coordinated, and too perfectly timed to be natural. Someone was providing them with intelligence about galactic defenses, and there was only one species with the knowledge and motivation to do so. In the end, the Emergency Assembly Council could only do what desperate people have always done when facing overwhelming force. They could beg. Message after message was sent to human space, offering everything from complete political submission to the transfer of entire star systems in exchange for help against the swarm. But the response from humanity remained the same as it had been for 2 years. Silence. 3 years had passed since humanity abandoned the Galactic Assembly, and the galaxy was dying. The core worlds, which had been considered the safest and most secure systems in known space, were now preparing for evacuation as the Void Swarm continued its relentless advance. What had once been a thriving galactic civilization of 400 species was now reduced to fewer than 50 scattered groups of survivors, desperately fighting for each day of continued existence. Supreme. Chancellor Yuna sat in her office in the new Terran capital on Luna, reading the latest intelligence reports from the war zone. The numbers were almost too large to comprehend. Entire species extinct, billions of individuals consumed by the swarm, hundreds of star systems converted into alien breeding grounds. The galaxy that had once feared human expansion was now learning what real conquest looked like. "The situation in the core worlds is deteriorating rapidly," reported Intelligence Director Min Ho as he entered her office. "The Galactic Prime system fell yesterday, along with what remained of the Assembly government." Yuna looked up from her reports with interest. "Any survivors?" "A few thousand refugees managed to escape on the last transport ships, but the planet itself has been completely consumed. The Great Assembly Hall, where they voted against us 3 years ago, is now part of a swarm hive complex." There was a certain poetic justice in that fact, though Yuna was careful not to let her satisfaction show too openly. The same hall where 400 species had declared humanity too dangerous to be trusted was now a feeding ground for creatures that made humanity look peaceful by comparison. "What about the emergency government on Sanctuary Station?" she asked. "Also fallen." The station's defenses lasted approximately 6 hours before being overwhelmed. Ambassador Kale Oath was among the casualties. Yuna nodded thoughtfully. Kale Oath had been one of the primary architects of Resolution 7749, the legislation that had forced humanity out of the galactic community. Now he was dead, along with most of the politicians who had supported him. The galaxy was paying a heavy price for their fear of human ambition. A soft chime indicated that someone was requesting permission to enter her office. "Come in," she called. The door opened to admit Dong Hyun, leader of the humanitarian coalition within the Terran government. His faction had been growing stronger over the past year as the scale of galactic suffering became impossible to ignore. Many humans were beginning to question whether watching billions die served any useful purpose. "Chancellor, I need to speak with you about our current policy regarding the galactic crisis," he said as he took a seat across from her desk. "What about it?" "We have the power to stop this. Our military technology is decades ahead of anything the swarm has encountered. Our AI systems could coordinate a defense that would save millions of lives. We are choosing to let entire civilizations die when we could easily prevent it." Yuna studied his face carefully. Dong Hyun had always been an idealist, someone who believed that humanity had a moral obligation to help others regardless of how they had been treated in the past. His faction represented a significant portion of human public opinion, but they were opposed by an equally strong group that believed the galaxy deserved exactly what it was getting. "And what do you propose we do?" she asked. "Send our fleets to save the same species that voted to limit our military development, risk human lives to protect people who declared us too dangerous to exist as equals. I propose we act according to our values instead of our anger," Dong Hyun replied firmly. "Yes, they treated us badly. Yes, they made decisions based on fear instead of wisdom. But that does not mean we should become the monsters they believed we were." Before Yuna could respond, another chime announced the arrival of another visitor. General Si Jin, commander of the Terran Defense Forces and leader of the military faction, entered the office without waiting for permission. His faction believed that the galaxy's current suffering was not only justified, but necessary. "Chancellor, I hope you are not seriously considering Dong Hyun's proposal," he said, as he took the remaining chair. "The galaxy made its choice 3 years ago when they voted to contain and control us. Now, they are learning the consequences of that choice. Billions of innocent people are dying," Dong Hyun protested. "Children, families, entire cultures are being erased from existence. How is that a proportional response to a political decision?" Sejin turned to face him directly. Those billions of innocent people supported governments that declared humanity a threat to galactic peace. They benefited from trade policies that discriminated against human colonies. They lived in a system that was designed to keep humanity weak and dependent on alien approval. "That still does not justify genocide." "We are not committing genocide," Sejin replied coldly. "We are simply declining to prevent it. The Void Swarm is doing exactly what Void Swarms do. They consume everything in their path. The galaxy knew this threat existed, but they chose to weaken the only species capable of stopping it." Yuna listened to the argument between her two advisors with growing interest. The debate they were having was being repeated across human space as people struggled with the moral implications of their government's policy. Some humans wanted to intervene immediately, while others believed that helping the galaxy would only encourage them to take humanity for granted again. "What about the practical considerations?" she asked. "If we intervene now, what guarantee do we have that the galaxy will not simply return to its old patterns once the crisis is over?" "None," Dong Hyun admitted. "But we should help them because it is the right thing to do, not because we expect gratitude or reward." "The right thing to do was to treat humanity as an equal partner in galactic civilization," Sejin countered. "They chose a different path, and now they get to live with the results. If we save them now, they will convince themselves that the Yi threat was never really that serious, and they will go back to fearing and resenting us within a generation." As the debate continued, Yuna received a priority communication from her intelligence network. The message was marked with the highest security classification, indicating that it contained information that could affect policy at the highest levels of government. "Excuse me for a moment," she said, activating her private communication system. The holographic display showed the face of Colonel Park Woo-bin, one of her most trusted intelligence officers. His expression was grim as he began his report. "Chancellor, we have intercepted a communication from the surviving Zentari leadership. They are proposing to surrender their remaining territory to humanity in exchange for protection from the void." Swarm! Yuna felt a moment of surprise. The Zentari Empire had been one of humanity's strongest opponents in the Assembly, consistently voting for measures that would limit human influence and power. Now they were offering to become a human protectorate. What are the terms they are proposing? Complete political submission to Terran authority, transfer of all remaining military assets to human command, and acceptance of human oversight for all government functions. In exchange, they want us to guarantee the safety of their surviving populations. The offer was both tempting and troubling. On one hand, it would give humanity direct control over one of the galaxy's most advanced civilizations. On the other hand, accepting it would mean taking responsibility for protecting people who had spent years trying to limit human power. "How many Zentari are still alive?" she asked. "Approximately 50 million, scattered across 12 colony worlds. Without our protection, our analysts estimate they will be extinct within 6 months." Yuna closed the communication and turned back to her advisors, who had been watching the exchange with interest. "The Zentari want to surrender," she announced. "Complete political submission in exchange for protection from the swarm." Dong Hyun leaned forward eagerly. "This could be the beginning of a new relationship with the galaxy. If we save the Zentari, other species might follow their example. Or it could be a trap," Sijin warned. "The Zentari spent years trying to contain our military development. Now they want us to use that same military to save them from their own mistakes." Yuna stood up and walked to her window, which looked out over the lunar landscape and the Earth. Beyond, humanity had grown stronger during their 3 years of isolation, but they had also grown harder. The species that had once eagerly joined the galactic community as idealistic newcomers was now cold and calculating in its approach to alien relations. "Schedule a meeting with the full cabinet for tomorrow morning," she decided. "We need to discuss whether humanity is ready to return to galactic affairs, and if so, on what terms." As her advisors left to prepare for the meeting, Yuna remained at her window, contemplating the choice that lay ahead. Humanity had the power to save the galaxy, but doing so would require them to set aside 3 years of anger and betrayal. The question was whether the species that had been rejected by the galaxy was still willing to save it, and whether salvation would come with a price that the survivors could afford to pay. The debate would continue, but time was running out for the galaxy's remaining populations. Soon, humanity would have to decide whether they were still the idealistic species that had joined the Assembly 2 centuries ago. 5 years had passed since humanity abandoned the Galactic Assembly, and the Void Swarm offensive had suddenly stopped. Not because the alien species had finally found a way to fight them effectively, but because humanity had finally decided to act. The galaxy's surviving representatives had expected rescue, but what they got instead was conquest. Admiral Tae Young stood on the command bridge of the Terran hegemony ship Sovereign, leading the largest fleet ever assembled by humanity, into the heart of what had once been Void Swarm territory. Around him, 1,000 human ships moved through space with perfect coordination, their hulls gleaming with technology that was decades beyond anything the galaxy had seen during humanity's membership in the Assembly. "Target the primary hive. Complex at coordinates 774, he ordered his tactical officer. "Full quantum disruption spread." The weapons that fired from the human fleet were not the plasma cannons and missile systems that other species used. These were tools that could unmake matter at the quantum level, reducing entire planets to their component atoms in minutes. The void. Swarm creatures that had terrorized the galaxy for years were destroyed so completely that they simply ceased to exist. "Hive complex eliminated, sir," reported the tactical officer. "No trace of swarm presence remaining in this system." Tae Young nodded with satisfaction. The operation was proceeding exactly as planned. Humanity was not just defeating the Void Swarm. They were erasing it from existence with the same cold efficiency that the creatures had used to consume alien civilizations. But this was not a rescue mission for the galaxy's surviving species. This was the opening move of humanity's own expansion into the power vacuum they had allowed to be created. On the bridge of the diplomatic vessel New Geneva, Ambassador Do Yan was preparing to deliver humanity's terms to what remained of galactic civilization. The few surviving alien governments had been gathered at a neutral station in unclaimed space, where they waited nervously to learn what role they would play in the new order that humanity was creating. "Are you ready to begin the transmission?" asked her communications officer. "Yes," Do Yan replied as she straightened her formal diplomatic uniform. "Open a channel to all surviving governments." The holographic displays throughout the station activated simultaneously, showing Do Yan's image to representatives from the dozen species that had managed to survive the Void Swarm onslaught. Her expression was perfectly neutral as she began to speak, but her words carried the weight of absolute authority. "To the surviving representatives of galactic civilization, I bring greetings from the Terran hegemony and terms for your continued existence," she began. "5 years ago, your governments voted to limit human expansion and military development out of fear that we posed a threat to galactic stability. You demanded that we surrender our most advanced technology and submit to alien oversight of our growth." She paused for a moment, allowing her words to sink in before continuing. "We offered cooperation and received suspicion. We offered friendship and received fear. We offered our strength in defense of galactic peace and were told that our strength itself was the greatest threat to that peace." The alien representatives listening to her transmission shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They all remembered the vote that had driven humanity from the assembly, and they were beginning to understand that the consequences of that decision were far from over. "Now the galaxy has learned what real threats look like," Do Yan continued. "The void swarm that consumed your worlds and your peoples was the kind of enemy that the galaxy should have been preparing for. Instead, you spent your time and energy trying to contain the only species capable of defeating such threats. On the Zentari refugee world of Haven, the few surviving members of their government watched the transmission with growing dread. Prime Minister Velkar had been one of the strongest supporters of Resolution 7749, arguing that humanity's rapid military development posed an unacceptable risk to galactic stability. Now his entire civilization existed only because humanity had chosen to allow it. "The humans are not offering us a choice," he said quietly to his remaining advisors. "They are telling us what our new reality will be." "What choice do we have?" replied his chief of staff. "Without their protection, we will be extinct within months. The Void Swarm may be gone, but there are other threats in the galaxy, and we no longer have the strength to face them alone." Back on the diplomatic station, Do Yan was outlining the terms of survival for the galaxy's remaining species. "The Terran hegemony offers protection and basic rights to all surviving civilizations that accept our authority. Your governments will operate under Terran oversight. Your military forces will be integrated into hegemony command structures. Your trade and technology development will be subject to Terran approval." The terms were harsh, but not unreasonable. Humanity was offering the aliens a chance to continue existing, but only as junior partners in a human-dominated galaxy. It was the same relationship that the aliens had tried to impose on humanity 5 years earlier, except that humans had proven they could back up their demands with overwhelming force. Species that accept these terms will be protected against all external threats and will be allowed to maintain their cultural identities and internal governance systems, Do Yan continued. "Species that refuse these terms will be considered hostile and will be treated accordingly." The threat was polite, but unmistakable. Humanity was no longer asking for permission or seeking approval from alien governments. They were simply stating the new reality and allowing each species to decide whether they wanted to be part of it or opposed to it. On Earth, Supreme Chancellor Yu Na watched the diplomatic proceedings from her office in the rebuilt United Nations building. The structure had been expanded and redesigned to serve as the capital of humanity's new galactic government, with sections dedicated to administering the dozens of alien worlds that would soon fall under Terran control. "The hegemony response has been even better than we projected," reported Minister Jin Su, her chief of alien affairs. 11 species have already transmitted their formal surrender documents. The remaining holdouts are requesting additional time to consider their options. And the Zentari. They were the first to surrender, as expected. Their government has already begun transferring administrative control of their remaining territories to Terran governors. Yuna nodded with satisfaction. The Zentari Empire that had once led the effort to contain humanity was now begging for human protection. Their pride had been broken by 3 years of war and the constant threat of extinction, leaving them grateful for any chance to survive. "What about military resistance?" she asked. "Minimal. The Vegan Republic attempted to organize a defensive alliance among the holdout species, but their fleet was destroyed when they tried to deny passage to our expansion forces. The engagement lasted less than 30 minutes. The speed and completeness of the victory demonstrated exactly why the galaxy had been right to fear human military capabilities. The technology that humanity had developed during their 5 years of isolation was not just superior to anything the aliens possessed. It was so advanced that their resistance was meaningless." In the rebuilt assembly hall on Earth, representatives from the surviving alien species gathered for the first session of the new Galactic Council. The chamber that had once housed 400 equal species now served as a throne room for humanity's dominion over their subjects. The aliens sat in designated sections, their voices heard only when humanity chose to listen. Yuna took her place at the central podium, looking out over the assembled representatives. Some of them she recognized from the old assembly, survivors of the government that had voted to exile humanity 5 years earlier. Others were new leaders who had risen from the ashes of their destroyed civilizations. "Welcome to the new galactic order," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the silent hall. "The galaxy that once existed is gone, consumed by the very threats that you refused to let humanity prepare for. What remains will be rebuilt according to human principles and under human leadership." She gestured to the alien representatives sitting before her. "You are here not as equals, but as survivors. Your species exists today because humanity chose to save you, not because you had any power to save yourselves. This is a reality that you will need to accept if you want your civilizations to have a future." The silence in the hall was complete. Even the usual background noise of translation devices and nervous shuffling had stopped as every alien present absorbed the full implications of her words. "You once feared what humanity might become if we were allowed to grow strong," Yuna continued. "You failed to understand that by casting us out, you guaranteed we would become exactly what you feared. We are what you made us, and you will live with the consequences of your fear." As she spoke, holographic displays around the hall showed images of the new galactic map. Human territory now stretched across hundreds of star systems, including most of the former core worlds and many of the galaxy's most valuable resources. The surviving alien species controlled small enclaves scattered throughout human space, existing only at humanity's sufferance. "The galaxy is ours now," Yuna concluded. "Not through conquest, but through your own choices.